Hi everyone, this is Nancy and McFeagle from Paper Moon Tarot, and I just wanted to pop on and do a quick look at a feature that there's some discussion of out there, which is borders or not borders. And I tend to lean towards the borderless, but I see that there are situations where borders make sense from an artistic standpoint, from a reading standpoint. So I just wanted to go through a few decks and look at the borders. One that I think should not have borders, the borders don't work, and others where the borders work for different reasons. So McFeagle's going to help me here apparently. He's tearing my shirt off. Thank you. So I'm going to start with a deck where I don't think the borders work, and I haven't gotten around to trimming it. And that is the Efflorescent Tarot. I like this tarot a lot. It's kind of glossy, so a little hard to see in the video. But the borders are, you know, the big white borders don't help it. And around those white borders, there's a big black line. Now you can see that it's such a thick black line. That's just not appealing to me. And again, every time in my videos, it's me, my subjective opinion. So it doesn't mean the deck's bad or anything like that. In fact, I love this deck. But for me, the borders don't work. I think those images would pop much more clearly if there were not borders there. So that's a deck example of borders just don't work. I want to, you know, hold up an example next to that of a deck with no borders and see how, to my mind, the art pops. This is the Thoth Journey Oracle on my left, your right. And I think the colors and everything just pop out better without borders. However, on this deck, they put borders on the back that I think are hideous. I'm sorry to the creator because it's a beautiful deck, but just you use borders on the front and the back, and this is an example where I think the back is not served by the borders, and the front is beautiful borderless. So just looking at some variations there. Okay, so decks where I think borders work. I think they add to it and they're well used. I'm going to start with the Dust to Onyx deck, which is a beautiful, beautiful deck. The production quality, this beautiful matte stock, and I got the more travel size, and I happen to love that size. The artwork is incredible, and the borders are basically these thin lines, so they're understated. They are in a sort of reflective gold, so that adds a lot of class to it. In this deck, you will find there are some cards, I'm just looking for them, where the border is along the bottom only, not the top. And I believe that this is because the artist was sizing artwork to fit on the cards, especially in this smaller size deck, and used the borders to size the art. In other words, this piece of art didn't fit proportionally. They couldn't stretch it out to fit the whole thing, and this one stretched out to that extent. And so the artist cleverly used the borders to work with the piece of art effectively. And I think that's a really good use of the borders in this case. As I say, I also like the fact that the borders are this beautiful kind of reflective gold foiling effect. Everything about this deck is beautiful, by the way, in my opinion. And so, so there's an interesting use of borders to frame the art and size the art in different ways. So that is the Dust to Onyx. The next deck I want to look at uses borders in a much simpler way. This is the Divine Feminine Tarot, and the borders are just so thin and simple here that you almost don't see them. You know, they give you a frame for the title and a little dip here to put the number in, so they highlight those two elements, and that's a good use of borders too, to point out to you the numbering and the titling of the cards separate from the art. But again, if you look at the Efflorescent Tarot and this, the size of the border, look at the thick black line on this one and the very thin subtle gold line on this one. And I much prefer that. I think it works better. The other wonderful thing about this deck and how it uses borders, first of all, the art extends over the borders. So you've got the cloud floating over the border. You've got stars over the border here. The border doesn't confine the art, but it sort of gives a feeling of structure to the art. And I like that a lot. This deck uses this very thin, simple border to advantage. It also adds, in this case, there's not a lot of color going on in these cards. It's basically a gold accent to the black background. So the gold frame just adds that one little more gold pop to the art. So that's the Divine Feminine, and again, look here where the animal's tail is coming out over the border, the star is coming out over the border. So this is using border as art. It basically is adding a feeling of substance to the card and making it part of the art. So there's one more from the Divine Feminine. So that is, I think, a good use of a border. Now, one of the best uses of a border that I've seen is from this Illuminated Tarot that has the most, I'm trying to get the light right, the most amazing borders. This one, in fact, is just a partial border, just around the bottom, and look how the horse's head flows into the border. It fits the shape of the art, which I think is very important in a deck like this. And all the borders are different, and they are foiled. So again, they give you that pop of color. They are an art element in and of themselves, and they frame the picture very well. So this deck without the borders would be a totally different experience. In one case, this element of the card, the hand, actually extends out of the border. It's a brilliant use of borders, border art. And I think that's the difference. If it's border art and not just a border for the sake of a border. And I do realize that in printing cards, a border probably helps with the cost. You're not bleeding the color off the frame, you're not having to foil borders and so forth. But if an artist can use the border as an element of the art, I think that's great. So that is the Illuminated Tarot. One more to show you the variety of borders that go on here and the foiling that goes on in this deck. Absolutely gorgeous deck. Okay, next to last, I've got a deck that I just got called the Moonlight Tarot. And I think this sort of continues the theme of the border as art. This border is pretty consistent as opposed to the last deck. This border is pretty consistent with the use of exactly the same border. But if you look at a couple of cards next to each other, if we can get the light right. Okay. Nope, it's going to be hard. But anyway, the one on the left, you can see the border goes over that light background, where the one on the right has a background that almost feeds into the border. It makes the border look more elaborate on top. And the border certainly works differently if you have a very dark background or a very light background. Maybe better over here. Sorry for that. But the border adds an elegance. But the other thing about this deck is that the cards are longer than standard tarot cards. I'll show you the proportions. I mean, they're actually shorter, but their proportions are such that they feel very elongated, okay? And this border, top and bottom, pulls your eye up and down to the border and feeds into that elongated feel of the card. So the use of the border here, besides framing this smaller art very nicely, also makes your eye move from the top border to the bottom border. It's not a continuous border. And it emphasizes the length of these cards, which I think is quite elegant and nice. Look at that one more closely. My big finger off the border. You can see it. But that's a very interesting use of a border, and again, used to some extent, I believe, to play off the proportion of the card itself. So, the last one I have is a deck where the borders, to my mind, I could live with them or without them. But I see where they're part of the artistic vision. This is the Four Elements Tarot. And it's all about fun, bold colors, almost a fabric-y feeling to the cards. And these borders, you know, obviously are adding to that. The other thing they do is they work for the elements. So this is fire. It has a bright orange, yellow border. And this is air, has a blue, cloudy border. Again, I could see stripping off the side border here and just having the middle card would still give you some coloring inside for the suits. But I don't know, they're just fun. It's a really fun deck. And again, there's another fire with the fiery border. And there's our magician. And so there are some decks where the border is just a fun artistic element. And again, you know, the sizing of the deck changes completely with these borders. You'd have a much narrower, smaller, almost travel-sized deck if you took the borders away. So this one, like I say, I could do either way. I could see trimming those sides, but I also think they're just really fun cards. And unfortunately, with terrible cardstock, I wish someone would bring this deck out with really nice cardstock. Maybe rethink the sizing, maybe rethink the borders somewhat. But anyway, that is my last example of a deck with borders that I think are worth considering. There are other decks where I'm like, why do we have a border? I guess they needed to print it economically or something. But my point in this video is there are good reasons to have borders. Borders can be used very creatively. They can be used for practical reasons in terms of the printing cost, but also the art and how you're dealing with the length of the card or fitting the artwork on the card proportionately, especially if you resize and do different sizes of decks, a standard tarot and a travel size, that kind of thing. So those are my thoughts. And McFeagle has been a very good boy during this whole thing. Thank you, McFeagle, for helping me out. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about borders, borderless, case by case, which I think is more what it's about. And anyway, thanks for watching, and you guys have a good day. Talk to you soon. Bye.